Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. A few housekeeping things before we get started. We will try to get to any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question, please type it into the question area within the GoToWebinar navigation, and we'll get to as many as we can in our allotted time. One continuing education credit, or CEC, will be emailed to all participants on the live version, and a link to a recorded version of today's webinar will also be included in that email. You should receive the CEC email and the link within the next 1 to 2 days. There is no need to email ACSM asking about CEC credit. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our ACSM moderator, Dr. Jeff Pottinger, the Dean of the Graduate School and Research Integrity Officer at Grand Valley State University. Dr. Pottinger?
Thank you, Nate. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the American College of Sports Medicine, I want to welcome you to this webinar titled Part 2, Heart Rate-Based Training, How to Maximize the Use of Wearable Technology. Our co-sponsors today, the American College of Sports Medicine and Polar, have a strong relationship that is built on providing the best and most useful information to individuals participating in exercise and training programs. The American College of Sports Medicine is the largest sports medicine and exercise science organization in the world. With more than 50,000 members and certified professionals worldwide, ACSM is dedicated to advancing and integrating scientific research to provide educational and practical applications of exercise science and sports medicine. In 1975, the idea of portable heart rate monitors came into existence on a skiing track. At that time, there was no way to accurately record heart rates during training. Just over a year later, Polar was founded near the city of Oulu, Finland. In 1979, Polar filed its first patent for wireless heart rate measurement, and in 1982 launched the first ever wire-free wearable heart rate monitor, changing the way athletes and individuals trained forever. Today's webinar presenter is George Centeo. George has a Master of Arts degree from the University of Northern Iowa and a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Hawaii. George currently serves as the Manager of Training and Education at Polar Electro Incorporated. In this role, he works directly with physical education instructors, personal trainers, fitness directors, health club owners, strength and conditioning staff, and various collegiate and professional coaches across the country. George and his staff conduct hundreds of online on-site trainings annually, educating professionals on how to best utilize and incorporate heart rate-based training into their respective programs. Whether he is strength training, running, or playing sports recreationally, George always trains with a heart rate monitor. It is with great pleasure that I present to you George Centeo.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Pottinger, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Thanks, Nate and ACSM, for having me back. For those of you who were here last summer, we did our part 1 of heart rate-based training. It was titled Train Smarter, Not Harder, and this one is how to maximize the use of wearable technology. So the idea is we're basically kind of building off of that last one, and you'll see that we're going to start with some questions that people posed on the last webinar. We'll start with that, and then we'll build looking a little deeper into some of the functionality and features, things that you could do with wearable devices. So I have a question before we get started, and just want you guys to think for a quick second. Do you own a wearable device or know someone who does? I'm guessing many of you answered yes to that question just because it's the world we live in. And here's some facts I found from a recent article in Forbes. 1 in 6 consumers currently own and use wearable technology. The wearables market exceeded $2 billion in 2015. It's looking to hit almost $3 billion this year and projected to be over $4 billion in 2017. And smartwatches will lead the wearables market. It accounted for 59% of wearable sales in 2015, and is estimated to grow to 70% of sales in 2019. So our objectives for today, with that backdrop and knowing that wearables are a big part of our world today, and how we can leverage these and utilize them for our own personal use, but also if we're working with athletes, clients, and so on, that's our focus. And our objectives, as I mentioned, the first two will be answering questions that came out of the last webinar. The first set of questions will be surrounding just basic use of heart rate monitors. The second set of questions will be related to scientific principles related to heart rate training. And then finally, the next 3 points are digging a little deeper into the practical applications and how we can use those platforms online and with apps to get the most out of the technology. So objective 1, answering some common questions surrounding the use of heart rate monitors. Let's get right into it. So these are pretty much just came right off of from ACSM, and I put them on here, and I put some bulleted points, and we'll go through these together. So are the monitors accompanied by an apparatus that is worn around the chest that transmits heart rate info? Obviously, there's some that do and some that don't. For the chest-based units, they transmit the info, the heart rate data, either to a watch or an app on the phone or to an iPad. And I know with the polar devices, they typically will either use a RF or radio frequency or the Bluetooth low energy to send that signal. Do you feel like heart rate monitors without chest straps are as accurate as heart rate monitors with chest straps? And this comes up a lot from our coaches and other folks. And let me first say, these are two different ways of monitoring. And when you put on that chest strap, you're basically picking up the electrical signal coming from the heart. So very much like putting on the leads and doing like an EKG. And obviously there's a lot of history and research and validity tests and things done on that, showing that heart rate, with the chest strap is, very accurate compared to like EKG monitoring. Now the other form that's become popular recently is the optical heart rate, or OHR, where basically it's just a watch worn on the wrist, and it's shooting a light and picking up the reflection and basically measuring blood flow underneath the skin. Depending on the device and the technology in there and the use of it and so forth, these can be very accurate alternatives. But bottom line, if you're comparing one versus the other, it's not the same type of measuring. And if you were a coach or a training pro or college athletes and so on, you probably would want to go with the chest strap based solution. Now, having said that, for a lot of people, if 5 to 10 beats, depending on the mode, I could tell you from personal experience doing lots of different tests with the chest strap versus without. When it comes to certain activities like steady state training, for example, going for a jog at 6 miles an hour, 6 miles per hour, I look down at the chest strap unit and it's 152 beats. I look at the wrist-based unit, it's 152 beats, basically spot on. Now, if I go and pick up the intensity and I run hard for 2 minutes, basically building to almost a sprint, and I get my heart rate up to like 94% on my chest strap, I notice my wrist-based unit might be at like 88% or so, 89%. Not far behind, but definitely not the exact same thing. At those higher and lower intensities, we tend to see that. Again, from personal experience, I do some swimming. Not much, just recreationally once a week or so, and I prefer the wrist-based there because sometimes for myself I notice, I don't know if it's just the drag from the water or the sodium or chlorine content, I tend to, with the chest strap, get kind of some sporadic readings and some spikes here and there, but with the wrist-based unit, I've had a lot of success, had some good clean data, and I'll actually share one of those examples a little later. For individuals who underwent bypass surgery, what polar monitor is best, chest strap or wrist-based? Similar to the previous question, this kind of depends on what their needs are, what they're looking for. Practical considerations come into play here as well. I mean, if it's for 24/7 monitoring, may not be the most convenient to put on a chest strap and wear it all day long. Again, I would lean towards, especially for somebody like this, to use a chest strap based unit where you're getting that electrical signal. But again, if it's more for all day tracking and not so much just during exercise, then the wrist-based alternative might work here. The good news is with most, at least I know, again, speaking firsthand with the polar products, you can now, after the session, have access to that detailed heart rate curve. You can even export the raw data. So if you needed to share that with a cardiologist or therapist you're working at in rehab or something, showing your actual numbers, your beats per minute every second, or even with some devices the heart rate variability data is available as well. How accurate are heart rate monitors, and how are they impacted to those with heart rate irregularities? They're very accurate. Again, it sort of depends on making sure proper use is followed. So just your basic troubleshooting steps, we'll talk more about those. I think there's another question that addresses that, so I'll save that. But if they're worn properly, usually very accurate. Now, when it comes to people with irregularities such as an arrhythmia, like AFib, for example, these people tend to have, just sudden, spikes or electrical activity that could happen, while they're just sitting, or it could be in the middle of an exercise session. So it's important to sort of cross-reference and use other things such as like an RPE or maybe their breathing to kind of determine, was this just an episode and it was a spike, or was it in fact, caused by exercise that they're getting up there. So obviously if they can carry on a conversation, they're not breathing heavy and so forth, it might be that they just had a electrical surge at that point, they have high reading. It's not necessarily that, they're working too hard or something to that effect. How long does a heart rate monitor take to sense the change in heart rate? I find it difficult to know when my true heart rate spikes and dips when doing short intervals. So for the first part of this question, again, this is a comment, I think I hear myself saying this a lot now. It depends on the device. I know back in the day I used units that you could set the sampling rate to 5 seconds, 15 seconds, even a 60 second where it would pull it. Now pretty much all of the units, it's every second. It's updating and giving you that reading, and as I mentioned earlier, there are some that even will go and give you the beat-to-beat sampling with that heart rate variability. But for the most part, for just heart rate, beats per minute, it's pretty much every second, so it should be live continuous readings. What may be happening here is, let's just say this person is doing a hard station or maybe an interval for a minute or so, and their heart rate is climbing 93%, 94%. They stop at the minute, and maybe they're taking some breaths, getting some recovery, and they still see their heart rate at 94, 95%, and they're wondering, maybe my heart rate monitor is not keeping up, it's, not accurate, and it may just be that, your body is still sort of on the upswing, and you need some time for that recovery. And as we know, depending on the fitness level, and some people can really just shelf off and have a nice quick drop off and recovery. Others, it takes a little bit for that heart rate to come back down on those intervals, so it may not be as clean when you're looking at those peaks and valleys. So it kind of varies between individuals as well. I have female clients that have trouble with erratic heart rate monitor reading. Any suggestions? So whether male, female, doesn't matter who you're working with, this is the troubleshooting piece. You follow the same steps. If it's not working, if you're getting these weird spikes and it's 130, and then it jumps to 211 or drops to 0, those are just signs that it's not getting a good reading. So a lot of times if you're using the chest-based monitors, putting a little moisture on the backside of that strap will definitely help. Water's great. A lot of times we'll recommend like a ultrasound gel as well, and that just helps conduct that signal better. That's probably the best thing you could do. Also readjust the strap, make sure it's sitting near the heart and it's in contact with the skin. Retighten it. Another quick tip with the new ones where they kind of snap in and snap out, one thing you could do is unsnap it from the strap, wait a little, a few moments, and then snap it back in. Sometimes if it's been searching for a device with the Bluetooth pairing and so on, and it doesn't connect, it may go to sleep mode, and that may be why it's not, giving a connection or whatever. So that's an alternative also. But I will say with the female side of things, I have seen this in clubs and even firsthand working with some folks that some ladies, no matter what, and a lot of times they are larger chested individuals, no matter what they do, kind of scoot it around and try and make it work, it's just not giving them a good reading. So what we've done is had them rotate it around and put it on the back, and it tends to work just fine. I know some coaches that also have their athletes rotate it to the side, and I've heard they've had success with that also. Just because in the front sometimes it's too obstructive with some of the lifts and movements they're doing, so the back or the side could be an alternative. All right. Is there a specific type of cardio warm-up that is better than others before a strength training program? I would say there's no specific go-to that this is what you should do to warm up. There are some general guidelines to follow, and that would be, namely to gradually increase heart rate and get blood flow to the working muscles. So obviously if you're going to do a lot of lower extremity or lower body work, you'd want to make sure you're getting movement and blood flow to those muscles and not focusing on arm swings and upper body movements. But that increased muscle temperature will help with greater extensibility and elasticity in the muscles. And as a general guideline, probably around 10 minutes. And if you're looking at heart rate, at the end of the warm-up period, you should be right around that zone 3 or the green zone, ready for whatever it is you're about to do. When loading strength training workouts, does that have to be done with a loop or watch like the M400 or A300, not just a sensor? This is a polar-specific question. I think this is in reference in the webinar. I talked about how you can create workouts online and then load it onto your watch. So yes, pretty much all of the new polar devices have this functionality. The exception would be, as they're asking here, and just the sensor itself doesn't have that capability, typically because there's no readout on it. So with the watch, you could see it. And the same with the loop. That's just like a band, like a bracelet, kind of there on your wrist. So there is some LED lights and such, but it doesn't have that functionality. But pretty much all the others, M600, M200, M400, V800, A300, you have that capability where, on Polar Flow, you can create those workouts and then load them onto the device. All right, so those were your basic questions, and then now we'll move to more questions that are kind of more scientific in nature. So, are there submax tests that can be performed to obtain an estimated max heart rate? It's a lot of the submax tests that are out there. Basically, if you look at the protocols, they kind of stop or decease at about 85% of your age-predicted max heart rate. Kind of what's recommended in a lot of those. So you wouldn't use a submax test to get the max heart rate. Ideally, you would actually have a true max heart rate test done in a clinical setting. If that's not practical or safe for yourself or a client, then there are some alternatives like some field tests, and I just kind of put one up here. And as an example, there's various step tests, things that you can gradually build your intensity. So this is one that you could follow, and it's 15 minutes if you were running at a normal pace, and then just to build that baseline, get warmed up, and then find the hill that would take you about 2 minutes to get up, and go ahead and run up the hill as hard as you can at a pace like your tempo pace, basically something you could maintain for about 20 minutes, and then head back down the hill. Then you're going to go and do it again. This time you want to pick up the pace to a pace that you could maintain probably for about 1.5 miles to 2 miles. And keep an eye on your heart rate. At this point, you're probably getting close to that threshold, 85%-ish, maybe 10 or 15 beats off of your max. And then finally, head on back down the hill. Give yourself about 30 beats to recover, meaning if you're at 170 on that lap to go up the hill, this time let it drop to about 140 or so, and then give one hard push. This time you're going to run at a pace you could hold just for a minute, so pretty close to an all-out effort. And at this point, you take a look, and you're going to be pretty close to your max heart rate. So This kind of gives you an example. Obviously, there's other things you could do, whether you're playing with the incline on a treadmill or doing other things, depending on what's accessible to you. But the idea is to sort of build that base first, gradually pick up the intensity to the point where you're basically giving close to an all-out effort, and that should get you, close to that max heart rate, as opposed to using just, a formula or an estimated number. This one was a tough one. If someone has a low anaerobic threshold, but a high VO2 max, what does that tell us? And how do we give training advice? And at first, I kind of thought this was a trick question because it doesn't make much sense, because typically when you get somebody tested for, VO2 and they have a high, capacity, lung capacity, and, let's just say for a male, 69 or 70 milliliters per kilogram per minute, you would think, they're probably in great shape. They would crank out great times. They got a high anaerobic threshold and so forth. But I actually followed up and found out the case that this was related to. And this person was, in fact, clinically tested with a high VO2 max and in fact, did have a low anaerobic threshold. So my only explanation would be, as far as what it tells us, that, there are some rare cases and everybody's different. This is probably more an exception than the rule, so like I treat it as an outlier. But what we do know is they have a low anaerobic threshold, and when we're talking about threshold, that's related to the production and clearance and the body's ability to clear that lactate. And so you can train to increase that or sort of raise the ceiling, if you will, and that's done through training, at just below, just above that threshold, which is usually that sort of uncomfortable point. And, you have to put your body through that stress and get it training so in that energy system if you want to improve it. So it would be, whether it's, tempo runs or interval sessions or workouts hovering around, that intensity will, hopefully gradually raise that number for them. Is resting heart rate officially considered to be heart rate at rest in the supine position or in a seated position? Most protocols, standard protocols, have you laying in a supine position, but for whatever reason, maybe you have somebody that they have knee issues or it's hard for them to get down and get up and so on. So if you use sitting as an alternative, the key is consistency. So if you test them or if you test yourself while sitting, just make sure every time you do a follow-up, you do it while sitting. So you want to keep that constant. But as far as sort of officially, it's laying in a supine position. This is a short question. What about Karvonen method? So for this one, I guess I'll just give some information on it. For those of you, I'm sure you've heard the term. It's been around for many years. And there's a lot of different formulas out there, different ones for males and females, use a percentage, obviously the 220 minus your age is sort of a basic starting point for a lot of them. How the Karvonen method sort of is unique, it takes into account heart rate reserve, which is basically your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate, and also that resting heart rate in conjunction with it. So really, resting heart rate is the element that's added to this method. And here's an example. So somebody who has a max heart rate of 180 beats per minute and a resting heart rate of 60 beats, if you wanted to sort of calculate their target zone or their training zone, and let's say you wanted it at 60 to 85%, you could do it by following this formula here. So, 120 times 60% plus you add the resting heart rate back in, so plus the 60 would give you 134 to 162. And you could see here, even if you know a little bit of math, if you have a high resting heart rate, it would bump that up a little bit, the zone. And if you had a very low resting heart rate, some world-class cyclists, runners, and things typically have very low resting heart rates, that would lower that target zone a little, not a whole lot. So that's one thing I found when I've used it in the past, that it doesn't, vary widely. I mean, there's a little bit of movement, but not a whole lot. But what I can say is that it's a lot different, a little more demanding or a little higher most times than if you were to just take max heart rate times 60%, and that would basically give you, for this same individual, something like 108 to 153. So on the low end, it's kind of a big difference, which isn't, I think, too big a deal. It's more the high end we're sort of worried about, and it's about 10 beats different there. So just a different strokes, different folks, and depends on, you know, who you're working with as far as if you would utilize something like that. When measuring resting heart rate, can we use heart rate during sleep? We wear your monitor as you sleep as opposed to measuring it after resting 5 minutes post-awakening. For this one, I actually have some experience with this. When I was a high school PE teacher and coach, and we used heart rate monitors, the cross-country coach had the kids take them home and do this. They wore it at night, looked at downloaded their files, looked at their graphs, and it's kind of cool to see how low some of the heart rates got and stuff. But really, when you're doing that, you're looking at a sleeping heart rate, and it's not necessarily when we throw around resting heart rate. It's pretty much assume we're talking about, you know, you're awake and alert, but you're pretty much at a very rested and relaxed state. So ideally, it is first thing when you wake up, laying in a supine position, relax. And another tip is to do like 3 to 5 consecutive days and then take an average, just so you know you're not just picking one day and maybe you had some stress or a bad day or something. You don't want it to affect it. So taking a few days and an average would be a good suggestion there also. So would you consider achievable max heart rate to be a measure of overall fitness? Considering this, some very fit individuals will have lower overall resting heart rate measures and subsequently may be unable to achieve a max heart rate outlined in a training program. A short answer, quick answer here on the, would you consider max heart rate, achievable max heart rate to be a measure of fitness? I would say no. Max heart rate is unaffected by training. It basically is what it is, and often over time as you age, it'll sort of decrease along the way. But what does change and what varies between people is people's ability to train sort of at or, more near their ceiling, if you will. Thinking of your max heart rate as your ceiling. Some people are comfortable and more anaerobic and can maintain those higher intensities for longer. Others are not as capable. So as far as fitness, though, typically those individuals who are more fit can do a lot more work without having heart rate, climbing and hitting their max. So they basically have a lower floor, if you will, so they can do a lot more and still be sort of at a comfortable area, and it takes a lot more effort to achieve that true max heart rate. So for number 7, I think this is the last one. How do we educate laypersons on using heart rate as a measure for activity level when participants follow blogs or other means of reference that may not include scientific support? So, I mean, you guys know there's all kinds of stuff today to track, whether it's a pedometer, accelerometer, things that will give you steps, activity data, heart rate, so on. They're all good. It's better than nothing. It's good to have some tracking, get some information, stuff that you can baseline, kind of see if you're getting better, getting worse, meeting your goals, and so on. But if you were saying you're doing a test or a study, or you wanted it to be very accurate and so forth, I would say you'd be hard-pressed to find anything better than heart rate as an excellent measure of intensity or what's going on with the body. So I think there's nothing wrong with all those other trackers and things that are out there, but if you're looking at, especially during exercise, if you want an accurate reading of intensity, heart rate would be the way to go. So now that we got all those questions answered, we'll move on and focus on some practical applications of wearable tech. So for those of you that were on the last one and maybe had some of those questions and stuff, hopefully you got those answers, you feel a little better, and for everybody else and for all of us, hopefully we enjoy the next 20 or so minutes kind of digging into some of the uses and applications for what's available. So in this first section, I want to focus on three things: training data, sleep data, and activity data. So looking at that 24/7 activity tracking. And when it comes to training data, it's kind of two parts. We'll look at during the session, so the immediate feedback you get, and you get that in the form of obviously heart rate, but a lot of other things as well, depending on what type of device you're using and what you're looking for. But you may be getting intensity, caloric expenditure, speed, distance, and other measures as well. And it can be utilized, if you're doing interval style training, looking at your different phases of your workout, so your work phases versus your rest phases, your recovery times, and so on. So a great tool in that sense. But again, you get a lot of good information after the session as well. And so I'm going to show a few just screenshots of some samples. This comes from Polar Flow. So this is like the online portal where a lot of the, if you're using a Polar device and you sync it, this is where it would go. And of course, there are all kinds of different devices out there, and they all, I'm sure, do similar things. I'm just most familiar with this, obviously, so I'll be using these examples as we go through. So you can see this was from a tempo run, and 40 minutes in duration. You got the distance, 4 miles, average heart rate and max, total caloric expenditure for that 40 minutes. This is a GPS-enabled unit, so you also get, speed, average speed, max speed, distance, stride length, ascent and descent with the altitude. And one that I kind of notice a lot of people are paying attention to and getting some use out of, just kind of gauging the sort of the effect of the session, something we call like a smart coaching, where you're getting feedback a little more detailed about the session. Like this is, say here, this was a demanding session, and the load is 13 hours, meaning it would take about 13 hours to get, adequate recovery and to replenish those energy stores and so forth. So just a little more detailed information. Just like we have heart rate zones, because this was a run, you could also analyze your speed zones, and you can customize those. You can change them. Or go with the defaults, just like heart rate, and you can, see if your pace was in line with your goals. Also, you got the GPS, so you could see where you were at. This was actually at a conference, I think the Tactical Strength and Conditioning or something out in San Diego last year. So that's Qualcomm, I believe, football stadium. But anyways, went for a quick run after work. The heart rate zones, you could see it here. This was a tempo run, so for that individual, a good example we just talked about earlier, if they're trying to raise that anaerobic threshold, you sort of want to have that sort of uncomfortable training right around that pace where you're less aerobic and getting more anaerobic, and that's usually around that 85% in that yellow zone typically. So you got that feedback, and you can see what zones you were in and for how long, as well as that curve of your heart rate. If you're on like more of a weight management plan, there's all kinds of data, again, that's very convenient. You just click buttons, and there's all kinds of stuff you could get access to, usually in a monthly report or a weekly report. So if you're on more of a weight management plan and you're really tracking calories in, calories out, and you want an accurate depiction of your caloric expenditure, this is just looking at your training sessions, and it's showing you week by week. So 2,500 calories, 2,200, 2,000, and so forth. So, all things being equal, if nutrition stayed the same, hopefully you're cutting back and making smart choices on the nutrition side as well. We all know that's very important as well. But if that, let's just say, stayed the same, and you went from sitting on the couch doing nothing to now doing 2,500 calories a week of expending, that type of energy, it's, pretty confident over time you're going to start seeing some weight loss along the way. So when it comes to a training summary. This is sort of the last snapshot where you can kind of take a look and do some reflecting. Maybe you thought, wow, I've been doing a bunch of those spin classes or those Group X classes, but yet you look and you say, well, I guess not. I mean, for this past month, I only about 5% of my workouts were Group X. So maybe next month I want to go take a few more classes. So just a quick place for you to get a quick snapshot and see kind of where you were spending your time, what types of activities or training sessions, and then also the time in the different heart rate zones. Again, if this was somebody looking to improve their performance or raise their anaerobic threshold and that type of thing, this would say next month I might want to do some shorter sessions and go a lot harder, get some more zone 4 time, because this is, you know, a little more aerobic-based training with a lot of zone 2 and 3. So just some basic feedback there. And all this training obviously is key and it's great, but you know, if you're not getting adequate rest and recovery, you know, it sort of can really curtail those positive effects and those results. And that's what I want to talk about next is sleep. And it's an essential aspect of any serious training program. And the National Institute of Health, you know, recommends 7 to 8 hours of sleep per day for adults. And I'm sure some of you out there are going, wow, I wish I got 7 or 8 hours a night. And I'm sure there's others saying, well, I can't function if I don't get my 8 or 9. So, you know, everybody's different. But in general, for adults, we should be getting 7 to 8 hours. And the National Institute of Health goes on to say that, you know, if you're, let's say, losing out on 2 hours of sleep a day, that's like 14 hours a week, and that sleep deficit builds up. And it basically, you know, says, you know, bad sleep habits and long-term sleep loss will negatively affect your health. Not might, not could. I mean, it's going to have a negative impact on you, and it's something to pay attention to. And it actually recommends, and NIH actually recommends, like, you know, journaling or just keeping track, logging your sleep. So now what's nice and convenient is you don't have to keep a notebook by your bedside and kind of log your wake and sleeping times. A lot of the devices now actually have fine-tuned filtering and algorithms that will actually recognize when you're sleeping and give you that. And I know, like with the Polar devices, they'll give you restful sleep and restless sleep, as well as a total sleep time. And I purposely put this one out. So for those of you, I got a quick explanation. So for those of you saying, this guy's getting less than 5 hours of sleep, I will say my daughter was born in July, and I purposely put this one up. This is 2 months later in September. So those of you with children, those of you who are parents, I'm sure you can appreciate or sympathize with me on this, but not a lot of sleep, to say the least. And I share this because it's interesting, and if doing some reflecting, I looked at my training data during this month, and there's I'd say a nice correlation as far as there wasn't a whole lot going on with my training, and that makes sense, because if you're going to be putting out great effort and getting in great, you know, hard sessions and so forth, and if you're not resting and recovering, it's just a matter of time before, you know, you're wearing down. You probably get, you know, sick or injured or just not feeling well. Maybe you just stop altogether. So it's something to definitely stay on top of. And again, you don't have to guess. You could just wear your device, take a look, and see your report. So this was a month view, kind of looking at, for the month of September, what did you average? And I would recommend looking at things a little more closely, meaning on a weekly basis. And again, that's very easy. Like, we're talking clicking a button, and it gives you these readouts. And again, the goal being, all I'm looking at is that number in the red box. I want to see that I'm averaging greater than 7 hours, 7 hours a night, you know, on a weekly basis. And, you know, I'm falling a little short, but it's something that, again, the information's in front of me. I know it's something that, you know, it's important, and I need to do better. I have the information now. You know, what you do with it is a whole nother thing, but at least now you have it, and that's the first step. And then now you can go make those changes and commitments, you know, to get better at it and so on. So just like how sleep is a nice supplement to training and is an important part, you know, activity tracking definitely has a place as well. In other words, you know, 30 to 45-minute spin classes or workouts are great. If that's all you do, and then you sit behind a desk all day and then go home and sit on the couch all night, and that's kind of what you do, that's not the greatest thing either. And you want to add that activity throughout the day and sort of be mindful of it. So we look for those alternatives, whether it's, parking farther away, taking the stairs, finding other modes of transportation and stuff, so that, we're doing the work and not machines and vehicles and things. But, these are all things that can help. But again, how much of a difference is it making? How much more active are you? Are you active enough? And that can all be accomplished through your data and seeing it on your device as well. And this is just from a study showing sedentary time independently was associated with a greater risk for all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease incidence for mortality, even cancer, and type 2 diabetes. So definitely that, sedentary time is not a good thing and something that, you want to try to avoid. Again, using this technology to help you with that, one nice feature I know that, again, the Polar devices have is what we call an inactivity stamp. So if you are sitting, let's say, at your desk for 50 minutes, 50, you'll get some haptic feedback. It'll vibrate or beep on your wrist there to let you know, hey, you've been sitting for too long, and it'll give you a little message saying, get up, move around. You've been stationary for a while. If you ignore it, you will get an inactivity stamp, as you can see with that orange triangle, and it is permanent. Those do stay on your record. Not a good thing. But if you heed the warning and get up, move around, maybe you jack up your desk if you have like a standing desk, kind of do some stretches, walk a little bit, whatever, then you're fine. You don't get that dreaded inactivity stamp. So this just gives it another look at just some simple stuff that if you have this device on, you're using it to train, if you keep it on throughout the day and stuff, you can get some valuable data as well that can kind of look at the whole picture and not just, the 40 minutes when you're getting your workout in. So with the activity data, a lot of times we hear just things that are thrown around like, very simple, like, oh, try to get 10,000 steps and so on. What these devices do, and in the Polar Flow, you basically pick your level 1, 2, or 3, and basically as you do that, based on your height, weight, gender, and all your information, it'll tell you what the expected intensities are. So, for example, for myself, to hit 100% of my activity goal, it would be doing the equivalent of like an hour and a half of jogging, or 3 hours or so of walking or moderate activities, or 11 hours or so of being on my feet doing light household chores and so forth. So that kind of gives you an idea, and it gives you that expectation of what you would need to do, or what combination of things you could do to accomplish that. Same thing here. I'd recommend just taking out a weekly report, and in blue, that dark blue line you see across the top is your activity goal 100%. So all I'm looking for is 7 days in a week. I would like to hit or exceed my activity goal most days of the week, so at least 4 out of the 7. And I don't know why I'm finding all these negative examples, but fell a little short this week. Got three days where I exceeded the activity goal, and 1 day where I came close at 92%, but not a good week as far as that just daily activity. And again, that's another component that you can track and stay on top of. It'll further break it down, and things you can look at here as well are just to get a look at, the intensities, because that makes a difference also. You got your lane time, your sitting time, standing, walking, and then even, your moderate or your more vigorous activities, and it'll kind of break down how you spent your time. And, I'd be surprised sometimes when I get these, like a day like 40,000 was my best for this month or this time period. Sometimes I get that when 40,000 steps, like doing yard work or something, or, if you're raking leaves and doing stuff for a couple hours, it may not be that you physically took 20 or 40,000 steps, but it's saying you did the equivalent of based on the movement and activity that was picked up during that time period. And again, those are inactivity stamps. You can't can't get rid of them. They're always hanging around. So in the red box here, I just showed a quick snapshot of a month and got 22, so a little less than one a day for the month, I guess, which isn't too bad. But, you know, again, you have that data that you can kind of keep on top of and make changes accordingly. All right, so the next section, and this one is actually fairly short. I just want to go over a couple sort of more advanced tools that are available, how you can maximize, again, wearable technology to help you achieve your goals. And the two that I'll focus on here is with weight management, utilizing the polar balance as an example, and then, you know, accountability, and I'll look to, you know, sort of the social aspect of things with that. So I'm sure if you've been to the store, you've been around and did some looking for a wearable device, a heart rate monitor, or anything like that on the shelf, you might have seen next to it, you know, a Bluetooth scale. There's all kinds of them out there, a lot of different companies, and a lot of them have it where it'll sync up with your phone, with an app, with your watch. And so, you know, Polar has something similar. They have a Bluetooth-enabled scale that'll sync to your phone app or your watches, and it'll update your weight. But it's a lot more than that when you look at, and again, that's the focus of this section, is looking at online platforms and how that can really maximize the use of these wearable devices. So the Polar Balance, it kind of ties it all together where it's not just a device, like I'm checking my weight. What happens here is you set your target. Let's say you had a nice Thanksgiving, you did some damage on the turkey and stuffing and everything else, and you got some extra pounds you want to get rid of. So you set your target, and let's say you say your goal is to lose 8 pounds, and you're going to give yourself a couple of months to do it. So I want to lose 8 pounds in 8 weeks. And it gives you some guidelines right there. It'll say for somebody like myself with my height, weight, and everything, I'm looking at a deficit of about 454 calories a day. And the way this is set up is when we talk about balance and balancing the calorie intake and the calorie expenditure, it's recommending, you know, a 60% of that reduction or of that 454 deficit coming from nutrition, so less coming in, and 40% of that will be accounted for by increasing some activity. And it even gives you some recommendations. For example, cutting back on 2 servings of pasta could equal 273 calories, or if I jogged for 20 minutes, I could get 180 calories of activity, and so on. Going a step further, what's nice with it is, you know how a little while ago I shared with you about your activity goals and sort of that level 1, 2, and 3, and it'll, you know, set that activity target based on your, you know, height, weight, gender, and your level. Well, if you're using the Polar Balance, when it syncs to your watch, it'll actually update your activity goal based on how you're doing. So if you're continuing to not work out, if you're eating a lot, you're gaining weight, it'll actually increase your activity goals daily, because in order to get where you need to be, you're going to have to expend more energy. So it'll adjust accordingly, and it kind of gives you that. You see the scale there balancing, but it'll show if you're gaining or losing, and then continue to give those recommendations and also update your activity targets accordingly. So really cool. I was actually surprised. It was actually quite challenging trying to keep up with the activity goals, but I found it very motivating, even though it seemed real high as far as the expectations. But it certainly, again, increased my mindfulness, made me more aware of it, and, you know, made me grab the dog and take another walk and go for, you know, a little extra distance this next time, just to kind of, you know, reach those goals and accomplish what you set out to do. Along those lines, the next thing I want to focus on is something we're all probably very familiar with. You know, we live in a world where likes, posts, tweets, blogs are everyday occurrences, and, you know, a lot of people are very much engaged in these forms of communication. And you know, again, you have all this data, and it's very easy and convenient to click a button and share or text and tweet and, you know, get stuff out. And, you know, it's no secret that, you know, a lot of times if you are accountable to somebody other than yourself or to a small group or a community, you're much more likely to sort of stay motivated, stay on track, and keep up with your goals, as opposed to, you know, just sort of going at it alone and not having a support system. So I cited here just an old study where social support was associated with an increased adherence to exercise. So meaning those that were supported by, whether it was you know, a clinical professional or a trainer or a spouse or somebody, they were more likely to, you know, stick with the prescribed exercise. So how we can, you know, relate this to, again, these wearable devices and what you're doing with it, you have the ability to search. You type in somebody's name, you could look for them, and similar to like Facebook or anything else, you could put in a request to follow them. So that's sort of one level of doing this, and they can accept your invitation. So I have a colleague of mine, Josh, sent him an invite. He said, yeah, I accept, you can follow me. So now I have a feed, and I can look at Josh as well as, you know, other friends, family, people that I'm keeping up with, and I can see their activity data, their workout sessions, and if I wanted to look at more detail, I could click on Analyze and see his, you know, training data, see a graph of his heart rate and so on. I could type in there and give him a comment like, you know, nice tempo run, Josh, way to stay in zone 4, give him a thumbs up. And, you know, for a lot of people, you know, that makes a lot of difference. And just seeing that, they look forward to it. Maybe it's enough to keep them going. Maybe they feel engaged that way. They'll respond and kind of keep things going that way, communication-wise. So definitely something that can help engagement and build that sense of community. And so here's one for you Facebook diehards. Another thing you could do, it's very convenient. You could just push a tab and you could, you know, share. So if you just did a you know, a record time, or you just did your first marathon and you got some great data and you can't wait to share it with those in your network, you just push a button and you can blast it. Or if you're like me and you want to complain, you could say, you know, it was 90 degrees, 15-mile-an-hour headwinds, pushing my son in the stroller. This long, easy run was not so long and not so easy. So you can, you know, have some fun with that. And again, you know, you already got the data, you have it there. It's sort of like you earned it, you got credit, you can, you know, share it and, you know, get that reinforcement from others. Finally, the last point is sort of the highest level, or using these tools to increase efficiency and quality of our programs. And this is the final section here, and we do want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to kind of get through this quick. There's 3 points. We'll talk on training targets, recovery status, and finally running programs. So with the training targets, if you're looking at this for yourself, or if you're working with an athlete or a client, if you're a coach or a trainer, you can, through the Polar Coach application, look in and see their entire calendar, whether it's weekly, monthly, and in gray you can see their prescribed sessions, and in red their actual sessions, and if you click on there you can see the detailed exercise data. Now if you go to a specific day, let's say Friday, you could click in there and you can create a training target for that individual, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So, and that individual could then add it to their favorites, which would mean it's on their sort of preferred list, and it'll always be available to them to bring up on their device when they're going to go work out. So here's an example of an interval run, just a 10-minute warm-up, zones 1 to 3, do a quarter mile, very hard in zones 4 and 5, minute 30 recovery in zones 2 and 3, and then repeat 10 times. So this is an example of like an interval run that you could follow. And earlier I talked about my preference with the wrist-based heart rate for swimming. So I have a 50-meter swim interval set up, and I'll show you that kind of from start to finish. So to kind of show you the full capabilities. And this is with, again, pretty much most of the devices. If you're online, you click on your calendar, you can type in and build your workout. So put in the different strokes, freestyle, breaststroke, backstroke, butterfly, minute 30 for each. So it's, you know, a down, back, and if there's any extra time, that's recovery, and then you go again. So you set that up. I have it repeating 4 times. I sync it up with my watch, and you know, on the face of the watch, it'll say, you know, freestyle, and the clock will count down minute 30. When you're getting close to the minute 30, it'll vibrate on the wrist and let you know. It'll flash the next one, and off you go. So, of course, you could just look up on the wall and see the clock in the pool or whatever, but it's nice to have it right on your wrist. All the data's in one place, and you're getting that vibration feedback as well. After the session, this is a snapshot of what you would see. The dotted lines are each of those preset intervals, and you can see I'm kind of all over the place. Probably somebody who's more advanced with swimming technique and more conditioned in that respect. You would see clean peaks and valleys aligning with the intervals. Notice some of mine I ran a little over, took a little extra rest before starting the next one, and I kind of got back on track. But nevertheless, you can see the 16 spikes, and you know, you can look at the load, heart rate, and so on. Recovery status. This looks at cumulative load, and what you're seeing here, the red represents your training load from exercise sessions, training sessions. The gray is a combination of previous training sessions as well as activity data, and the blue are load from activity. So what this does is it kind of gives you some feedback as far as you're undertrained, you're balanced, you're strained, or very strained. And that's kind of nice to see and track as far as from a cumulative standpoint. And just real quick, what this means for balance, it just means your recovery is matching up with your training time, and you're good to go. Strained, it's not a bad thing. If you want to improve, you need strenuous training, so there's nothing wrong with it. Just letting you know that you know, you're not having a lot of recovery, and you might want to add some of that in. If you're very strained, then that's showing that you've been training hard lately, and your cumulative load is very high. It's okay to continue working out. It's not going to hurt you or, you know, kill you. But what you don't want to do is go do another very hard session when you're at that state. So maybe a lighter activity, maybe a rest or recovery day before doing another hard session. And the worst of all is the undertrained, which, you know, all those gains and benefits that you've achieved will diminish and go down if you, you know, sort of go for long periods of time without keeping up. As we all know, it's nice after a few weeks to start seeing positive changes and the positive benefits and impact that come with exercise, but it goes the other way too. So if you go a few weeks with not keeping up, then you start to see those things diminish. And the last one, as I wrap up here, is running. We know running is a very popular sport. There's very little equipment required, basically a pair of shoes. Some stats for you. There were 30,000 running events in the United States in 2015, and over 64 million runners / joggers. And for that stat, it was in the last 12 months, people that reported running or jogging. So quite a few people getting out there. And I bring this up because a new feature and something that you can access, again, showing sort of technology at its highest where we are today, the complexity of it, sort of simplicity and complexity in the sense of it's not real complicated as a user. You kind of put in what you want to do, but it really will lay out a detailed program for you that you can follow. So with this running program, you pick your event date. Let's say March 19th, I want to do a half marathon, and I want to start today. And then I put in some information about myself. I train 5 to 6 times a week for about 45 to 60 minutes, fairly strenuous. And it's so dialed in that, let's say I said I want to do a half marathon in February, it would put a big red X up there and say it's not going to happen because you need a certain amount of time to adequately prepare for this type of event. So whether you're choosing 5K, 10K, and so forth, it'll guide you and give you sort of the minimum requirements. At that point, it'll lay out a program for you with some base building, a build-up phase, some tapering, and then your event. If you look just beneath the top bar in the middle here, it actually shows the prescribed sessions. And notice it's not just runs. There's some strength training, some core, some stability, static stretching, dynamic. And there's actually videos that will show up on your phone, on your iPad, online. You click play, and basically there'll be somebody on the screen taking you through with a countdown timer, 60 seconds, and you could do various stretches and workouts sort of to supplement your running programs. And all this is available basically just if you have a device and you're going to do a running program and you want to try it out, it's all available. And I mean, this is you know, pretty cool to have this type of functionality and programming. Just just doing some clicks and loading it onto your watch and having you basically set to go. So we kind of rushed there at the end. I know time's getting away a little bit. We're just about at our hour, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Just to recap, we answered those questions from last time, talked about training data, sleep data, activity data, how those all tie in, and how you can make use of those. We looked at going a little deeper with some of the tools and things that are available with incorporating the scale and the polar balance, as well as following folks and using that community online with the feed and getting that feedback. And then finally, creating training targets to get an efficient workout, looking at your recovery status, as well as the ability to generate those running programs. So with that, I leave you with hoping you're maximizing your wearable devices and taking advantage of all that they have to offer.
Thank you, George, for that great presentation. We actually have time for one question, and what I received from the audience today was the following. What are the pre-testing guidelines to consider prior to performing a test to determine maximal heart rate?
Yeah, so if you're going to be doing a max heart rate test, it's kind of your standard pre-testing guidelines. So just making sure you have, conditions are good. So you got adequate hydration, not a lot of, not any caffeine or alcohol beforehand. You want to make sure there's no undue, large amounts of stress on the individual. They got a good night's sleep. Probably recommend that they don't eat a heavy meal or haven't had anything to eat a couple hours before. Those are all good, suggestions as far as something to keep track of before a max heart rate test.
Great. Thanks, George. On behalf of ACSM and Polar Electro, thank you for attending today's webinar. I'll now turn it back over to Nate for a few final housekeeping details.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Pottinger, and thanks, George, for a great presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending. As a final reminder, an email link to your CEC, along with a PDF copy of today's slides, will be emailed to you within the next day or so. And that concludes the webinar. Have a great afternoon.